Celestine Moreau was a woman who had everything money could buy: an empire of businesses, a mansion guarded by iron gates, and a reputation polished so clean that no scandal could touch it. Her daughter, Aurora, was the center of her world, raised with tutors, luxury, and every opportunity that prestige could afford. But wealth creates walls, and sometimes what slips through those walls can change everything. One afternoon, Celestine walked into her garden expecting to find Aurora practicing piano with her expensive tutor. Instead, what she saw made her stop cold. Her daughter wasn't with any world-class teacher. She was sitting cross-legged on the grass, eyes glowing with curiosity, listening to Eli, the son of the woman the whole city called mad. The boy who grew up with nothing but shame and whispers around his name was now teaching the daughter of a billionaire. The picture was jarring. A child of privilege leaning on every word of a boy born in poverty and stigma. A mother who built her life protecting her reputation, suddenly faced with the sight of her daughter choosing wisdom over wealth, truth over polish. And in that moment, Celestine's entire empire of pride and control began to tremble. How could the son of a disgraced woman inspire her daughter more than all the professors she paid for? What happens when a genius society rejected dares to step into the world of the elite? And what unimaginable choice will a powerful mother make when her pride, her family, and her future collide? Sit back, grab your popcorn, and let's dive into this interesting story. The Moreau estate gleamed under the late afternoon sun, its manicured lawns stretching like an emerald sea toward marble fountains. The air smelled of roses, money, and power. For Celestine Moreau, billionaire widow and iron-willed matriarch, every detail of her home was a reflection of order, dignity, and unshakable control. Her name meant respect, her wealth, security, her daughter, Aurora, perfection itself. And yet perfection has a way of slipping through the cracks. Celestine had risen from a widow's grief into a woman of unyielding strength. The death of her husband had only sharpened her resolve. Aurora would not only inherit wealth, but also the iron spine needed to protect it. That was why tutors, scholars, and mentors were carefully chosen to mold her daughter into brilliance. Everything was planned. Everything was protected. So when Celestine wandered into the back gardens that day, she expected silence. She expected to hear Aurora's piano scales or the distant hum of a French tutor drilling conjugations. What she found instead froze her steps mid-path. There, under the willow tree, sat Aurora. Not in her usual stiff chair, not bent over books, but cross-legged on the grass. Her face lit with a joy Celestine had rarely seen outside of childhood. And across from her, unbelievably, sat Eli, a boy in worn shoes and a faded shirt. The son of Marianne Dubois, the woman society whispered about with pity and disgust. The mad woman. Celestine's breath caught in her throat. Aurora leaned forward, captivated, as Eli explained something with animated hands, something about stars, about music, about ideas that seemed to lift Aurora's gaze higher than the confines of her gilded world. The girl's laughter rang out, free, unburdened. It was the sound of discovery, of joy, but also of rebellion. Celestine's heart thundered. How could this boy, this son of disgrace, dare to step onto her grounds into her daughter's life? How could Aurora, groomed for greatness, find delight in his words instead of the wisdom of esteemed professors? Every instinct in Celestine screamed of danger. Reputation was fragile. One wrong association could unravel years of careful construction. The Moreau name had weathered storms, but this threatened to drag it into the mud of gossip and shame. And yet beneath her outrage, a flicker of something unsettled her further. Recognition. Eli's eyes burned with the same fire her late husband once carried, a brilliance too raw to be tamed by polished institutions. "Mother," Aurora called, spotting her at last. Her voice was unguarded, warm. "Come. Eli was just teaching me about how music and math are connected." Celestine's jaw tightened. 1,000 thoughts collided in her mind. Anger, fear, pride, and the faintest glimmer of curiosity she dared not admit. The billionaire lady stood at the edge of the garden, torn between the world she had built and the world she now saw reflected in her daughter's shining eyes. For the first time in years, she felt control slipping from her grasp. The collision of worlds had begun. That evening, the Moreau estate was quiet. The gala halls were empty. The servants retired to their quarters, and Aurora had retreated to her room. But Celestine Moreau did not sleep. She wandered alone into her private chamber, a room rarely entered by anyone else. The chamber was less a sanctuary and more a shrine. On the grand piano sat a silver-framed photograph of her late husband, Charles Moreau, a man whose charm and intellect had once captivated her, just as Eli had captivated Aurora earlier that day. Around the room, tokens of memory whispered of promises made and long buried, a violin case gathering dust, old letters locked in a mahogany box, and books Charles once read aloud when love, not fear, guided her world. Celestine sat before the piano, her hand hovering over the keys. She pressed one note, a low, trembling sound that filled the room with both beauty and grief. Her eyes burned. She remembered the promise. On the night Charles lay dying, his hand weak in hers, he had whispered, "Do not chain her spirit, Celestine. Let Aurora be free to learn, to love, to live." She had nodded through tears, vowing to honor him. But vows made in grief can wither under the weight of survival. After Charles's death, survival meant armor. She became the Iron Lady of Moreau Holdings, unyielding in business, ruthless in society. She had built walls so high that Aurora could never be touched by scandal, pain, or weakness. It was the only way to keep her safe. At least, that's what Celestine told herself. Yet today, in the garden, she had seen Aurora's eyes alight in a way that no elite tutor had ever achieved. And the source of that light was Eli, the son of Marianne Dubois. Celestine's jaw clenched at the memory of Marianne. Once a gifted pianist, Marianne had spiraled into poverty and madness after her husband abandoned her. The city mocked her as unstable, dangerous, unworthy. Celestine herself had pitied Marianne at first, until pity turned into scorn. Marianne was the kind of woman society warned about. Weak, careless, unfit. But Eli, her son, had inherited none of that weakness. Instead, he carried brilliance, an unsettling kind of raw genius that unsettled Celestine more than she wanted to admit. To allow him near Aurora was to risk everything Celestine had built, their name, their standing, their power. Yet to forbid him was to betray a promise made to the man she had loved most. Celestine pressed another note on the piano, the sound echoing like a judgment. She saw her reflection in the polished surface, elegant, commanding, but brittle. Beneath her power was a woman bound by fear of what others would say, fear of losing control. And so, alone in her chamber, Celestine faced a torment she could not voice aloud. Was she protecting her daughter or chaining her? Was Eli a danger or the very light Charles had asked her to keep alive? The shadows of memory pressed in, and for the first time in years, Celestine Moreau felt small. The mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Académie Royale, the most prestigious private institution in the city, buzzed with tension. Oil portraits of past rectors loomed from the walls, their stern gazes echoing centuries of elitism. Around the long oval table sat a dozen board members, men and women clothed in silk and arrogance. At the head, Celestine Moreau sat poised, her composure unbreakable, though her heart churned. The meeting had been called swiftly. Rumors had spread, whispers of her daughter being taught not by the Academy's finest but by Eli, the son of Marianne Dubois, were already slithering through the salons of the elite. Celestine had moved quickly, summoning Eli to defend himself before the Academy's guardians of tradition. The double doors opened. Eli stepped inside. No fine suit adorned him, only a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a confidence in his stride that seemed out of place here. Yet his eyes burned with a steady flame, the same flame Celestine had noticed in the garden. "Mr. Dubois," the rector began, adjusting his spectacles with disdain. "We are told you have been instructing Miss Moreau in subjects you are neither licensed nor qualified to teach. Explain yourself." Eli's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm, measured. "I do not teach from a license," he said. "I teach from knowledge, from books read in candlelight, from music carried in memory, from the truths I've discovered in the world itself." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the room. One board member scoffed. "Knowledge without sanction is dangerous. Education must come from institutions, not street philosophers." Eli met their sneers without flinching. "Institutions," he said, his tone sharpening, "are built to preserve themselves. They train obedience, not wisdom. I do not chain minds, I open them. Miss Moreau listens because I treat her not as a vessel to be filled, but as a flame to be kindled." Aurora, seated beside her mother, could not contain the smile tugging at her lips. She had never heard anyone speak like this. Not in her gilded classrooms, not in the endless lectures of polished professors. For the first time, learning felt alive. The rector's face darkened. "You dare challenge the authority of this institution?" "I challenge the notion that authority belongs only to the wealthy and the powerful," Eli replied. His voice carried a quiet force, one that filled the room despite his simple clothes. "Knowledge does not care for bloodlines. Genius can be born in marble halls or in the gutter. What matters is truth." The board members shifted, their pride stung. Envy and fear flickered in their eyes. They knew brilliance when they heard it, and brilliance from a poor outcast was more threatening than any scandal. Celestine sat rigid, torn in silence. Eli's words echoed those her husband once spoke, words that had drawn her to him long ago. And yet, what would society say if she allowed this boy to continue? Her empire balanced on reputation. Still, in that boardroom, something undeniable had taken root. Aurora's admiration for Eli deepened, while the institution's mask cracked under the weight of a truth too dangerous to ignore. The battle lines were being drawn. The chandeliers glittered like constellations above the grand ballroom of the Moreau estate. The gala was in full bloom. Politicians, magnates, and aristocrats mingling with champagne in hand, their laughter echoing against marble walls. For Celestine Moreau, the night was meant to reaffirm her family's unshakable position among the elite. Every detail gleamed perfection. The gowns, the music, the speeches. Yet beneath the glitter, tension lay hidden, waiting to strike. Aurora stood radiant in silk, yet her eyes kept darting toward the shadows at the edge of the room where Eli lingered, invited only under Celestine's cautious insistence that his presence remain discreet. Aurora's heart swelled with pride that he was here, in her world, even if unacknowledged. She believed her mother was beginning, slowly, to accept him. But envy is a patient predator. Among the guests, one man in particular, a rival board member, Henri Valois, watched with cold satisfaction. Valois had always despised the idea of a poor boy touching the circles of influence, and tonight he had prepared his strike. The orchestra fell silent as Valois raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice smooth but laced with poison, "to the Moreau legacy, unblemished and eternal." A ripple of applause followed. Then, with a cruel smile, he added, "And to the curious education of young Miss Aurora, under the guidance of none other than Eli Dubois, son of Marianne the Madwoman." The ballroom froze. Gasps sliced through the air like knives. A few chuckles followed, dark and knowing. The name Marianne carried a stench of scandal no wealth could cleanse. Aurora's face blanched. She turned instinctively toward Eli, whose jaw was tight, fists clenched at his sides. He stood taller, refusing to shrink, but the whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a storm. Madwoman's son. How disgraceful. Unfit. Celestine felt her chest tighten, the very thing she had feared. the fragile thread of her reputation snapping, was unraveling before her eyes. All her power, her standing, her carefully constructed walls trembled as society's gaze bore down on her. Aurora's voice broke through the silence, trembling but defiant. "Do not mock him. Eli is brilliant. He has taught me more than any of your lifeless tutors ever could." Her outburst sent fresh murmurs rippling. Scandal, rebellion, a billionaire's daughter defending the son of a madwoman in front of the city's most powerful. Celestine's hand gripped Aurora's arm, her knuckles white. "Enough," she hissed, her voice sharp with desperation. "You will not shame us further." She pulled her daughter back, away from Eli, away from the whispers. Eli's eyes met hers then, not with pleading, but with a steady, unbroken gaze that seemed to ask, "Is this who you truly are, Celestine Moreau? Protector or prisoner of pride?" But Celestine could not answer. She turned her face from him, her silence cutting sharper than Valois' cruelty. The orchestra resumed, but the night was shattered. Eli walked out into the darkness, carrying his dignity with him, though his heart burned. Aurora, in tears, realized the chasm widening between her and her mother. In that ballroom of glittering light, betrayal had done its work. Rain slicked the cobblestones as Aurora made her way through the forgotten quarter of the city, her silk dress hidden beneath a heavy cloak. The gala had ended in scandal, her mother's grip still bruising her arm, but Aurora's heart had led her here, to the place whispers had told her Eli often disappeared to. She found it in an abandoned library, its windows cracked, its grand doors sagging on rusted hinges. Yet inside, warmth glowed. Lanterns lit rows of broken shelves, patched with scraps of wood and rope. And there, at the center, stood Eli, chalk in hand, before a cluster of children dressed in rags. Their faces were alight with awe as he sketched diagrams on a battered board. Circles of planets, notes of music, fragments of poetry. Aurora froze, her breath caught. This was no shameful act. This was brilliance, raw, unpolished, defiant. Children who had been discarded by society leaned forward, hungry for knowledge no institution had ever offered them. Their eyes mirrored the same wonder she had felt in the garden that day. Eli turned and saw her. His expression tightened, not of anger, but of hurt that she had witnessed his humiliation and done nothing to stop it. Yet he did not pause. He finished his lesson, his voice calm, steady, inspiring. "You are not defined by what others say you are," he told the children. "Your mind is yours, and no one can take it from you." The children clapped, their joy filling the ruined library with more grandeur than any ballroom. Only then did Eli step aside to face Aurora. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "And you shouldn't have been dragged through the mud in my mother's house," Aurora answered, her voice trembling with conviction. "They don't see you, but I do. What you are doing here, it's light, Eli, real light, and they fear it." Eli studied her, searching for doubt. He found none. For all her privilege, Aurora's sincerity burned with the same fire as his own. Behind them, a door creaked. Celestine Moreau stood in the shadows, her cloak soaked with rain. She had followed her daughter, though pride had nearly kept her away. Now she saw with her own eyes what her heart had tried to deny. A boy, branded by stigma, teaching with more dignity than all the gilded professors she had hired. Her gaze swept the room. The children wrapped in attention, their hope rekindled by Eli's words, and something inside her cracked. These faces, though poor, reflected the same hunger for truth her husband once spoke of. The memory of Charles's dying promise came rushing back, shaming her silence at the gala. Aurora's voice broke the silence. "Mother, you can tear me away from him, but you cannot unsee this. You cannot unsee who he is, and what he gives." Celestine's heart battled itself. Fear of scandal, fear of losing her empire against the undeniable truth that justice and dignity lived here, not in marble halls. The reckoning had come. The Moreau estate looked different that morning. The gates, once symbols of exclusion, now stood open. Workers carried crates of books through the halls while children from the poorest streets filed into rooms that had never before welcomed them. The mansion of power had been transformed into something unthinkable, a sanctuary of learning. At the center of it all was Eli, standing before a piano in the grand salon, teaching both the privileged and the poor. Aurora sat among the students, her eyes alight with pride. The walls that once echoed with stiff lessons and rigid rules now rang with music, laughter, and discovery. And above it all, watching with quiet composure, stood Celestine Moreau. For weeks, society had mocked her. The press had called her reckless. The elite whispered that she had lost her mind, throwing open her estate to street children and allowing the madwoman's son to teach under her roof. But Celestine no longer cared. The weight of reputation that had once ruled her life had been replaced by something heavier, yet purer: truth. She remembered standing in that ruined library, seeing Eli's brilliance shine through broken windows. That night she had gone to Marianne Dubois, the woman she had once scorned, and humbled herself. She had listened to Marianne's pain, her descent into madness born not of weakness, but of abandonment and cruelty, by the very society Celestine herself had upheld. And in Marianne's weary eyes, Celestine saw her own reflection, a woman trapped by expectations, crushed by judgment. With tears, she had whispered, "I was blind." Marianne, though broken, had given her what Celestine thought impossible: forgiveness. Now, as Eli taught in her home, Celestine felt that forgiveness echoing through the walls. She had made the unimaginable choice, not to protect her name, but to redeem it, to use her power not as a shield but as a torch. Aurora glanced up, catching her mother's gaze. For the first time in years, there was no distance between them. Only recognition, only love. When the lesson ended, Celestine stepped forward. Her voice, calm but firm, carried through the room. "This house," she said, "was built on wealth. Today it will stand on wisdom, dignity, and truth. Knowledge is not the right of the privileged alone. It belongs to every child who dares to reach for it." The children's eyes widened, some hardly believing they were welcome here. Aurora's smile trembled with emotion. Eli's eyes, steady and bright, softened as he looked at her. And in that moment, Celestine Moreau, once defined by pride and fear, was reborn as something greater, not a matriarch of wealth, but a leader of light. The unimaginable had happened. A billionaire lady, once terrified of scandal, had chosen redemption over reputation, justice over silence, and love over fear. The cycle of suffering had broken. The legacy of control had given way to a legacy of hope. And in the heart of it all, family, chosen not by blood alone but by love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again.